Good morning, friends, colleagues, and peers. I'm going to go ahead and get started. We've got a lot of content to cover and not a whole lot of time. My name is Nicole Martin. I am the owner of Community Healthcare Alliance for Financial Advocacy, aka CHAFA. We know how much we love acronyms in this industry, and that one seemed to work out well. So a little bit about myself. I don't want to spend too much time here, but I've been in the healthcare industry for over 25 years. Gosh, I'm aging myself there, guys. Over 25 years. And during all of this long journey and fun journey, some key areas I've worked in. Did professional coding for multi-specialty and surgical services for 10 years. I'm also a compliance auditor. For the last fun 10 plus years, I've been in director and leadership positions for risk adjustment programs, predominantly Medicare risk adjustment. I do have experience in commercial risk adjustment, ACOs, and other types of risk adjusted products, if you will. I've worked for many health plans, Cigna HealthSpring, Florida Blue, WellCare, just to name a few. I've been a certified professional coder since 2007. 2007. I got my coding license prior to licenses being required. So since 2007, and then my CHC in 2018. And then I'm also a member of the Association for Certified Fraud Examiners. So lots of fun to be had in this industry. Today, we're going to be focusing on planning and implementing artificial intelligence in CDI. So it may sound kind of niche-y, if you will, or niche, if you will. AI platforms and AI tools are not only used in CDI. We've been working with similar type tools in other areas, such as coding platforms, retrospective audit platforms, chart procurement platforms. Seems today that everything, which I love technology, and I'm very fascinated with artificial intelligence. It seems that everything we're working with today, all of a sudden, has some sort of AI in it, and it has for a while, but we just weren't always aware of it. So it's very much in the forefront today. It's in all the news. It's in a lot of programs and platforms that you may already be using in your organization. So we're going to jump in and talk about how do you really set the framework and what should you be looking at to plan for implementation. And we're going to jump into some of those workflows and things like that. And it's not only CDI. Again, what we're going to talk about from where you sit in your organization, and every organization is different. There is no one size fits all in this work. Really, each organization is unique. So we're going to talk about assessing organizational readiness, right? So we know we're going to talk quickly about challenges. I think we all feel the pain of these challenges daily, and also some of the successes and wins with those as well. But we're going to talk about assessing organizational readiness, right? So we're going to go dig in a little bit about provider employment contracts. We're going to talk about your value-based or managed care contracts. If anyone is joining from the health plan level, we'll talk a little bit about the health plan angle. That's still very, very crucial. And health plans are also implementing tools like these as well. Similar but different, right, in terms of what we're looking at. We are going to talk about provider education. Anyone who knows me knows that's dear to my heart. I think it is incredibly important. And we will talk about some good strategies for preparing your providers and staff and educating your organization for implementation of a tool like this or like these. And then, of course, system interoperability and workflows, huge area of attention in implementing these types of tools is looking at your workflows across all of your impacted departments. ROI and impact. We're going to talk loosely about ROI. ROI is very unique to each organization, and we'll talk more about that when we get there. Vendor and platform selection. This becomes fun. We can definitely over demo vendors. So we're going to talk about a good sweet spot, how many vendors I recommend that you demo and work with prior to making a final decision. Some key, so implementation planning and go live planning, of course. Key compliance considerations, and there's a lot of them. And then we'll close it up and we'll have some time for QA. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into our industry challenges. So these industry challenges are not really new. This has been going on for probably as long as I've worked in healthcare. And even when it was some paper charts, I'm really aging myself here, even when everybody was on paper charts, there were still similar challenges, right? We might not have had managed care so much back then when we go back 27 years, but we still had similar issues. Fragmented data, things coming in, now, of course, because everything is, everything is digital mostly and technology, and those are coming in from HIEs and hospitals and all over the place. We have a lot of fragmented data. Time constraints. If there's any providers on the call this morning, I hear you. Also staff, right? We know our production requirements in CDI or prospective chart reviews, or actually coding of services. There's definitely time constraints. Workflow barriers, coding complexities. Coding only seems to get more complex. And there's a lot of changes, especially right now, a lot of unknowns and uncertainties. So we'll talk about coding complexities and how these tools should be working on your behalf. Resource limitations. I don't think I've worked in healthcare from the time I'm 21 years old that there wasn't a resource limitation. Regulatory compliance. Compliance is near and dear to my heart. I am a compliance certified in healthcare compliance, and compliance goes hand in hand with everything we do in healthcare. Tech usability and integrations, and then slow buy-in from providers. Again, I think there's always security when it comes to getting our providers on board. It takes a while. There's a lot of psychology that goes into working with certain subsets and groups, if you will, of people, and providers are already extremely have time limitations and issues with being able to manage everything that's being thrown at them. All right. So first thing we're going to talk about today is in terms of the content, really, is physician employment contracts. And it's not just physician, it's provider. Right? We are advanced practice professionals, our nurse practitioners, our physician assistants, and our physicians. These employment contracts are extremely important to understand. So we are going to jump right in. Physician or provider employment contracts truly are the foundation when you have a value-based care organization, right? And amongst everybody on the call today, all of your organizations are different sizes, different staff, different arrangements, different contracts. There's differences amongst everyone. But in my opinion and in my experience of working in value-based care organizations, whether it be the health plan level or the IPA, MSO, physician group level, the provider employment contracts are extremely important. They are a foundation for accountability and performance in VBC. And we need to, we're going to talk about, basically observing what's in your provider employment agreements today. Is there anything that's written into those agreements that supports VBC performance? And we can look at the flip side of that and think about the health plan side. And I'm going to try to infuse as much relevance for people that could be joining from a health plan environment. And we want to think about your network contracts with your providers, right? I've worked at Florida Blue Cross for 5 years. I was the manager of provider education for the whole state. And I can tell you one of the biggest challenges that we faced is that the provider contracts between the health plan had no meat in them to support value-based performance requirements. This was a challenge, and we were challenged on it consistently by providers who were not performing. So whether you're health plan or you're working for a physician organization, IPA, MSO, any level there in between, these contracts are extremely important and should be looked at while you are in this process of planning for implementation of a tool like this. Excuse me. Some of this may seem remedial to you, but some of you maybe are not, real privy to the different types of employment agreements that exist with your physicians or your advanced practice professionals. So we're going to talk about this a little bit, right? Typically, you have two different types of employment contracts, if you will. We have employed physicians and we have affiliate physicians, right? This is a typical two pools of contract that providers fall into. From the health plan perspective, we have some health plans that own physician groups. That's true. But most of the health plans providers would fall into an affiliate situation, right? And let's talk about the differences between these two, because it is incredibly important to success with some of these tools to make sure you understand what exists today and what maybe needs revision or updating or amending. And so, for example, we'll talk first about relationships, right? So employed providers, they're direct employees of a healthcare organization. They're direct employees. They work for them. Affiliate providers are typically only involved for a certain level of contract or health plan or payer with your organization. But they operate as an independent contractor. They do not have to follow all your policies and procedures. Compensation and benefits, and these things do feed into, I know we all like to think. So again, compensation and benefits, when the provider is employed, they get a salary. Sometimes they're in their provider employment contract. There is a incentive or bonus opportunity based on usually and should be quality of care for patients. There could be some other things in there like appointment. Could be things where an organization is tracking the percent of appointments for managed care patients that have occurred in a year or quarter. There's a lot of different things that can be compliantly tracked in compensation and benefits so that a provider has the opportunity to earn, incentives. Again, usually the organization is covering that provider's health insurance, retirement, et cetera. Affiliates, of course, it's usually they're usually very individualized agreements. There's usually a revenue sharing model or per service agreements, but the organization is not, or the affiliate provider is not falling under any of these potential incentives that the employed physicians. You're going to have different arrangements between these two types of providers or provider groups. Control and oversight. When you're an employed physician, your organization determines the policies and procedures in which you need to follow. Again, this can be a variety of things. So schedule, operations, clinical policies. I know some of you, I know there's some folks on the call that have worked with me in the last, company before CHAFA. We know that how deep some of these policies and procedures go. And employed providers are required to operate under those. Affiliate providers, the physician or that group retains control over practice operations, staffing, and decisions. It's very different engagement, very different requirements of those providers. Autonomy, again, employed physicians. I don't necessarily like to say their autonomy is limited, right? I think autonomy is more, there's a lot more oversight on what an employed provider is doing and making sure that they're operating within that organization's policies and procedures, tech systems, guidelines, et cetera. Affiliate providers maintain greater autonomy in decision making. They use their own EMRs. They maintain their staffing and their operations independently. And then scope, basically employed physicians, it's full employment with comprehensive obligations. Affiliate providers limited to, specific services, referrals, different plans, right? An affiliate physician might only be part of your MSO for Aetna, and there may be part of 6, 7 other IPAs for Humana, WellCare, Freedom, all the other different health plans that might be out there. Let's get in here to the next slide, though. So depending how you plan this out, you're employed, because again, employed physicians or employed providers have less autonomy and have more accountability to operating under your policies and procedures where your affiliates don't. So actually, and they're not usually on the same EMR because they're employed. There's a lot of differences between those two groups of providers, right? So yes, I agree. I think that while implementing these tools, it may be smoother to start off with an employed physician group. However, I'll tell you from my experience that with the right planning, implementation, and training, affiliate providers will do just as well. It's just a different approach and different way in some areas that you'll need to interact with them. One of the key here's a little tip here on this slide, and I'm going to share, one of my dearest mentors that has worked with me for many years and I've worked with, always makes this statement, and it is so true. And I'm going to give you one of those little golden nuggets right here. If you leave this webinar with one golden nugget, just one piece of information that has helped you, then this has been a success. Here's one tip that we'll share that I've put here that I've actually implemented and used in my own implementation projects for these. Typically, you prioritize your physician groups to go live or start on a tool like this once you get it implemented. But it's nice if you can use those providers that did really well in your employed population, implementing the tool as sort of a champion when you go to implement with an affiliate, right? Providers tend to like peer-to-peer interaction. This is a great opportunity for that to occur. Is to have one of your employed PCPs who's already using the tool and been implemented, maybe be involved for a short time with your affiliate side so that the providers have a chance to talk about how they feel about the tool and then share kind of some of the things they did to make their workflow feel easier or orient to the tool better and get used to it. All right, so next thing we're going to talk about is managed care contracts. So again, health plan, we'll talk about those a little bit more if anyone from the health plan is on the call. All right, managed care contracts. Really important that you understand what your managed care contracts entail and what type of contracts they are as you're planning and deciding how much of a tool do we need, right? So let's talk a little bit about the most common managed care contracts, right? We know there's a variety of different contracts that exist. Again, this is going to talk more high level. We're going to talk about full risk contracts versus upside only contracts. It's very important for a lot of reasons. And also what we like to think and what happens in the real world are two very different things. And so we're going to talk about those. Full risk contracts, risk sharing, right? If a provider group or a provider, you can have a variety of these things across an organization. So if a provider is in a full risk contract, that provider has assumed full financial responsibility for their membership, meaning when they do well, they get shared savings. When they don't do well, they owe deficit paybacks to the health plan. So you have a big difference here in full risk. Upside only. The provider will benefit if they do well, they get a shared savings, but if they don't do well, we're done. They don't have to do anything about it. So you can imagine already that there's going to be a difference. We don't like to think there would be, and I don't want to say for a second, I want to make sure any providers that are on the call, this is not a call out to your performance or practicing or any of that, but it really is real world what we've seen and what we've seen over many years, and it's also human nature. So we'll talk about the fact that the financial exposure in full risk is high. For providers in full risk, it is a high financial exposure. If you are not sure about risk adjustment or you have not been oriented well to clinical documentation improvement and why it is so important, not only for revenue or contracts, but for patient safety and malpractice prevention, it's important you still have a high financial exposure risk in a full risk contract with a health plan. Upside only, it's going to be more minimal. They retain their base payments. When they do good, they get rewards and incentives, in the quality sections, et cetera. But when they don't do well, again, they just carry on about their day. Incentive alignment. Full risk contracts are going to have stronger incentives for VBC performance. Hopefully, again, I'll kind of come back to health plan, anybody from the health plan or working with health plans on this call. Same idea in your managed care contracts. I can't tell you how many health plans, that managed care health plans that I've worked for and with that have nothing in the physician's contract to support value-based care performance. So something for quality, but that's it. And again, it's a slippery slope on incentives that are any incentives that have anything to do with HCCs or risk adjustment. However, there could be language that what might speak to that EMR access is required. That's a simple one. Can't tell you how, I think I have a flat spot on the side of my head from banging my head trying to get medical records when I worked at the health plan because a provider didn't want to give any access to the EMR, nor did their contract require them to. That puts you kind of in a pickle when you are trying to execute performance and the health plan side of things. And then again, on upside only contracts, limited incentives, again, it's focused on improving shared savings. It's not focused necessarily on that deep accountability for those patients from a contract perspective. Contract complexity, again, more complex with detailed risk provisions. Our full risk contracts are more complex, have more oversight, more membership, and we're going to talk about member volume in the next slide. And then upside are more simple and just focused on shared savings distributions. All right, member volume. This is another area that is extremely important when we're determining if we want to buy a Rolls Royce or if we're really just ready for the Yugo or the Datsun, right? So we want to talk about assigned member volume. Full risk, you're going to have much larger panels, much larger volume of patients assigned to providers, where upside only, again, the larger volume in full risk helps spread financial risk. In upside only, the volume's important for cost savings. And again, usually in upside only, where we have smaller patient volume spread, you can end up having some seriously volatile situations because, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, when you have two, upside only, the members are spread across with, onesie twosies here. There are 5 patients here, 3 patients assigned to this doctor, 2 to that doctor. If one of those patients does not do what they need to do, you have basically failed your performance on those 2 members, in the way in which they're being assigned. So upside only usually have a little bit more, what I kind of like to call it fragmented, because you could be assigned 1,500 members in an upside only contract, but they're spread across 50 providers, and every provider has like 3, 4, 2, 5, and they're 60 miles in between each other. So there's a very different approach in working from this tool perspective as well in those upside only contracts. Risk management, again, full risk minimizes the impact of high cost outliers. Upside, less financial pressure, smaller populations. We just talked about that. Full risk operational needs really does require robust care coordination and infrastructure. CDI or AI and CDI is one of those potential infrastructures that you might want to look at versus, hiring 20 coders or right. So there's a lot of things to consider here. Lower, upside only operational needs may be a little bit lower priority. Again, usually those members are spread in a way that, that same provider could have an upside only contract with Aetna, but have a full risk contract with Humana, and their focus is all on Humana, right? So there's no one perfect answer. Each of your organizations and contracting are going to be different. But it's extremely important that you're aware of what's going on. So when you're planning, for one, you see where you are today and understand what level of tool do I need or want, and what is my roadmap going forward. Do I plan on growing my managed care population or ACO? Because again, these tools are very, very helpful and have the same outcome on your ACO members, which, given the state of things going on in our healthcare industry, at some point we might all be ACO and all ACO. Maybe not, maybe we will, but however, these tools are equally important on ACO members and work just the same. So again, the member volume is a driving factor in what level of tool you want to purchase, right? So, and last, again, the larger member volume is critical to mitigate financial risk. Upside only, again, not to be in any sort of offensive way. Typically, you're in the game is going to be a little bit less when you only are responsible for 5 upside only members for Aetna. Okay, so there's some differences here in behavior and resource application based on managed care contracts, member volume, and the types of contracts that folks are in. Okay. So again, understanding, your managed care payer mix is extremely important. You might be saying to yourself, because again, everybody here on this call is coming from a different organization and you all have differences amongst you. Again, you may be saying to myself, well, Nicole, what if I have access to our managed care contracts? I have no idea. Nobody tells me those things. Believe me, I've been at senior and director level leadership in companies, and I've been told I can't have access to contracts. So nothing surprises me. Nothing surprises me. So when you're faced with that, we'll talk about your implementation committee, and we're going to talk about that in a couple more slides. And we'll give you some ideas and tips on how to circumvent not having access to these contracts so that you can fully understand what you're dealing with. Again, fewer members, we talked about all of this. And again, a lot of times managed care or health plans will start a provider group off in an upside only arrangement because they want to see them perform before they give them full risk. Full risk is a huge accountability and you must be ready. A lot of managed care plans or products or health plans will offer upside only to begin with so that they can get a sense of the performance of the provider group. So that's also a reason. It's not a reason why sometimes providers may be in upside arrangements because they're fairly new in the contract. Okay. All right. Provider education. One of my favorites. Yes, I'm a sick woman, but I do enjoy educating on risk adjustment, value-based care, and as a whole, compliance related to value-based care, and then just kind of organizational education. Provider education is crucial to the success of implementing a tool like this and it performing for you, right? If you get a Rolls Royce and you don't know how to drive it, it's probably not going to give you the same experience as, Mario Andretti, who knows how to drive it, right? So we want to make sure that we are, working with our providers and staff, not just the provider, on provider education, right? We want to have a smooth transition. Change is hard. These tools are very different and maybe some of what your providers and staff have been working with for years, right? And we always have that. That's the way I've always done it. Well, we can't sit in that thinking, right? But we can make it easier for our providers and staff to have a smoother implementation and transition into having a tool like this in their EMRs, et cetera. Again, we want, enhanced accuracy and compliance. It's really important to work with your staff and providers, and explain to them, how this tool is going to help speed up their processes, is going to ensure accuracy and compliance, et cetera. Seamless workflow integration. Again, it is extremely important, and we're going to jump into that in a few more slides. Extremely important to look at integrations and how it's working and make decisions for what works best for your organization. And then, again, we want to educate those providers and staff on the workflows, right? And then of course, building trust and confidence. A lot of people are afraid of AI, right? Or they don't, I don't want to say afraid of AI, but I think people who don't understand something tend to think it's negative, that it's bad because they don't understand it. I think it's important if you follow a good framework when you're selecting and implementing these tools and you make organizational and provider education a top priority, you will have a much smoother and hopefully happier implementation and performance outcome. We know that some organizations do not hire provider educations. We talked a little bit in the beginning about resource limitations, right? Again, that's a budgeting issue usually, or sometimes I've seen it as not necessarily having anything to do with money, but having a lot to do with lack of provider education on why it is important. You'd be surprised, or I'm not surprised because nothing really surprises me anymore. Is that I meet with organizations and consult with organizations that have, 70,000 members assigned to them across multiple health plans and ACOs, and they have zero provider education. Um, and then they wonder why the performance is so low, right? Provider education can be done well, but it needs to be done strategically and it needs to be done in a very targeted way. And a lot of times when we don't have strategies surrounding provider education, we overwhelm our providers. A lot of times it comes down to budget, and just hiring someone with that skill set is not a low salary. So there's a lot of reasons why not everybody has provider education, but that's all right because everybody really is an educator, and can do this work and assist each other as a team. It really does take a village to get the organization and staff and providers trained. Okay, we are going to jump into system interoperability and workflows. All right. System interoperability and workflow alignment. This is extremely, and I cannot stress enough, extremely important to the success of these tools. Whether it's an AI tool for CDI, whether it's an AI tool or a platform for coders, whether it's a retro coding internal QA audit product or platform, the interoperability and workflow alignment is extremely important. It ensures comprehensive documentation. We're going to talk more about workflow, development, and it also minimizes disruption and enhances provider efficiency. And so again, key areas of focus for interoperability and workflow alignment, right? Data integration and accuracy, provider adaption, right? We want to take a look at if it's the behavior of the potential CDI tool you're looking at. We want to make sure there's real-time data exchange for actionable insights. And we want to make sure that the workflows, first of all, the workflows are looked at, right? So essentially, when's the last time, and just think to yourself, when is the last time you sat down with cross-functional departments or teams that you work with, just you're all on your own, so we can have quality, risk, analytics, billing, coding, right? We think all of the different stops along the way. When's the last time you sat down to understand one of your cross-functional teams' workflows? Probably not often, right? Because everybody's laser focused on getting their work done and meeting their KPIs and making sure their job is done. But for the truth of the matter is all of these are interconnected. And it really is important to align the workflows so that not only the provider is happy first and foremost, but that everybody that has to interact with these tools along the flow of the river, if you will, is also cohesive. So again, workflows alignment is extremely important for provider adaption and adoption. Okay, cross-functional team collaboration. So when you're going into this planning and we're thinking about, how is this tool going to complement our organization? One of the first things we need to make sure we understand is the entire ecosystem's workflow that ultimately achieves mitigated audit risk and payment. Okay, and there's a lot of things that happen on those two ends of the spectrum, and you have to understand or work with your teams to understand how they all intersect with each other, because they do. And so, for example, some of the cross-functional team collaboration you may want to think about is definitely your health IT and systems integration teams, right? IT is a crucial player to implementing any sort of tool, especially AI tools or any technology. Your IT team or person should be part of that. Again, AI platforms need to be configured with EHRs, making sure that data standards are compliant, like HL7 and FHIR, and that everything is working correctly. The vendor itself, right? Whatever vendor you land on, we'll talk about demoing vendors in a couple slides. Whatever vendors you're demoing, once you ultimately get to, as you're demoing, you want to make sure that they are include, that they are inviting people from your cross-functional teams that you've involved them. We'll talk about the committee that I recommend in just a minute that you create. Your, clinical informatics specialist, really, making sure that, again, it's not just under that, because there's so many components to a workflow or a workflows to ultimately achieve a compliant, clean claim. And also that the documentation is supporting it. So again, clinical workflows, documentation needs, you need to make sure you have clinical folks involved. Your CMO, it could be your director of nursing, it could be a lot of different people. It could be a physician champion who understands very well the workflows across the provider component of your ecosystem. And then, of course, your leadership and stakeholders. So CMO, COO, your chief of operations, compliance officer, compliance teams, and there it is. There's not much you should be doing today when you're implementing tools or changing workflows, or that your compliance team or somebody is not part of. The compliance requirements in healthcare are complex, tremendous, especially when it comes to technology and HIPAA safety and data security. We've all lived through some pretty interesting events in 2024 that should have woke anybody up who really thinks that, hey, compliance isn't really necessary. We got it. Make sure you have compliance involved. All right. So we're ROI and measurable impact. On this slide, so calculating ROI for selection and implementation of one of these tools is very complex, and it's very unique to the organization itself. You'll notice on this slide, I don't have an ROI calculation for you. I would need information, really. Each organization needs to look at some of their current information or current performance rates in these areas, and then, calculate that further to see where your lift would be. This is going to be different from org to org. It could be different. It'll be different from provider to provider to provider under your group as well. So here's some things you want to look at. You want to look at currently today in your organization. What's your current HCC capture rate, right? You can get that data from health plans will give you sometimes either via portal or via lagged report, prospective capture rate, right? That'll tell you how well you're capturing dropped conditions from the year prior so far this year in February. Again, so, you want to get to determining what is the improvement that this tool could bring based on where you currently are. And then, of course, on the slide, what you're seeing is some industry outcomes for these tools, right? So typically in HCC capture rate improvement, right now from an industry benchmark perspective, there's about a 15 to 25% increase in RAF or RAF scores post-implementation of these tools. Okay, that's industry benchmarks. Quality measure performance, say about 20 to 30% improvement in quality scores. And again, a 15 to 25% increase in HEDIS measure compliance. So whether we're looking at STARS or HEDIS, if it's commercial, if it's Medicare, these tools absolutely give you lift. But in order for you to do an ROI or a cost benefit analysis, you need to understand where you are today, or what was your 2024 analytics, right, for the year. So we should be fairly close to closing last year in terms of data. Well, honestly, data coming from the health plan, if you're relying on health plan data, typically has a 90-day lag in it. So if at all you have internal analytics, or you have a dashboard or something you can look at even from an EMR, and it's still not going to be this perfect outcome of analytics. You'd want to use that, take a look at what did I do in 2024? What was my recapture rate in 2024, right? So we can see what are we looking to do in 2025, or what are we looking to increase based on performing or implementing this tool. Financial metrics, claims processing, 20 to 30% reduction in claim denials. Again, these tools are developed under, industry coding guidelines. Most of them, this is one of the things we'll be looking for and we'll talk about when we're selecting vendors to demo. And then resource utilization, right? 30 to 40% reduction in manual chart reviews. So right now you have 15 CDI staff and you're looking at transitioning into a tool. Again, you're going to have a huge reduction in manual chart reviews because the tool does it for you. So we'll talk more about that in a couple slides. And then 25 to 35% decrease in coding staff over time. I want to stop right here because I think it's really important for me to emphasize and reiterate these tools cannot replace 100% of your coders or CDI. So me personally being a certified professional coder and since 2007 and working in this field, also working in the real world and knowing that whether you have a tool like this or not, it cannot replace people 100%. It definitely can reduce staff volume, and we'll talk more about that as well. But I like to make sure I reiterate that because I know personally me as a coder, a lot of my peers and colleagues, and this is concerning. AI, like I said, when we are faced with something we don't understand so well or so deep, it feels really scary. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, yes, I've had to lay off staff after implementing a tool like this, but not all of them. It definitely can, it is efficient, cannot replace humans 100%. Not today anyway. Okay, so operational efficiency, documentation time definitely helps reduce the amount of time and information that a provider has to manually document in their EMR. I'm still writing like we're on paper charts, but you know what I meant. And then coding accuracy, yes, 30 to 40%, but these are industry standards again, based on these tools and some of the observations so far. Again, 30 to 40% reduction in denied claims, 15 to 20% improvement in first pass coding accuracy, and 25% reduction in retrospective chart reviews. That's subjective. We'll talk more about some of the ways we can use the analytics in just a minute. So vendor platform selection. This is always fun. I enjoy demos. I love demos. Honestly, when I worked at the health plan level, I used to go to RISE every year just so I could demo solutions we were looking for, and I absolutely adore doing it. Again, as we embark on the journey, and again, we are at vendor platform selection, as we embark on this journey to implement a tool like this and start to decide who do we want to demo even, the first thing I will tell you, you should be doing, this is a strong recommendation, it is a recommendation, you should be creating an implementation planning committee. You need representation from cross-functional teams to be part of this selection and implementation, right? Compliance is going to be number one on the list. There's a lot of compliance areas that need to be looked at when you're looking at vendors and selecting vendors to demo, the actual demos themselves. And then, after that demo occurs, there's other conversations that inevitably happen before you get to contract. So compliance, legal, whatever you call it in your organization, legal and compliance are different. Again, they are different and have different roles, but you should have in your planning committee compliance representative. IT has to be part of it. You cannot do this without IT or someone with IT knowledge. Physician leadership, you must have, it may not be the medical director, it may not be the CMO, but it needs to be a physician champion. It could even be, could be an RN who's very familiar with all of the providers' workflows and how all of their EMRs work and what they face as providers. And you would, of course, hope that the physician leadership or clinical leadership is practicing, because our administrative CMOs and medical directors who do phenomenal work in other areas, if they're not practicing right now and they're not interacting with patients and working the workflow that impacts them every day, their insights or feedback may not be as meaningful just from the perspective of implementing a tool like this. You've got to know the workflows clinically to be helpful on this committee. CDI leadership. If you have CDI, you definitely need your CDI team to be, or leadership to be part of this implementation committee. Quality should be there. Maybe you're not purchasing the quality module. Maybe you're only purchasing to start off with the risk adjustment module. A lot of these platforms have multiple modules and they offer usually an a la carte menu. Quality is extremely important to be there, even if you're not implementing the quality module. And you know why? Because the best way to close care gaps is via coding. And you would want quality to be aware of the flows that impacts care gap closure from a coding perspective. These things are going to be part of the tool. And that would be really important. You have quality there regardless of purchasing or contracting the quality module. Billing and coding has to be there. Crucial players. They understand your workflows. If you have coders, if you don't, do the providers code their own? There's a lot of information from the billing and coding team that they need to be part of this implementation committee. If you have internal QA audit, the last organization I came from, we had a robust internal audit team. We had 80,000 full risk lives in that company. We did a tremendous amount of internal auditing and adds and deletes and things like that with managed care. They should be part of this. There's a lot of valuable analytics that come out of these tools that can really help your audit team sample audits in a more targeted way and also create more targeted provider education instead of bombarding your providers with every single thing there is to do in risk adjustment, instead of focusing in on those bite-sized interactions where you can really get to the point fairly quickly. And then, of course, operations needs to be part of these. For the health plan side, all these same type departments on the health plan side, if you're working and doing the same thing, your network management team needs to be, they are provider facing. They would also, I say operations leadership on the physician side or provider group. Network management should also be part of this on the health plan side of things. Okay. So narrowing down, I'm going to talk a little bit faster because we've got to get through this and I don't want to hold you guys much past 9. Key factors to narrow down vendors. You want to set clear criteria and prioritize core CDI functions such as real-time documentation reviews, point of care feedback to the provider. The whole point of this is that it's real time with the provider. They're seeing the information, right, and they're taking action on the information within the EMR. Industry coding guidelines, you want to make sure you're reviewing to make sure that ICD-10 is updated routinely in October, that the HCC models are updated, and that clinical criteria and guidelines are current and updated. Additional things you want to look for when looking at vendors is query automation, reporting, and analytics. Analytics that I've seen out of some of these tools are absolutely phenomenal and really can help you work in a much more meaningful way with your providers. Strong integration capabilities. The best case scenario with these tools is that they integrate with your EMR, not overlay your EMR per se, that it's scrubbing the actual chart. There are workarounds with a lot of these vendors. If they can't integrate with your EHR, there's all these other, you can upload files, you can send rosters, you can send coding gap and care gap data and upload it into it. In my opinion, you may as well just use the health plan data then. Really, the key with these tools in CDI, the key for me, and one of the most beautiful things about it that I love, is the integration with the medical record. It is literally reading the chart. All of the other data, health plan data, HCC gap data, care gap data, is already lagged. It's already old. It's necessary, but it's like Mars and Venus, right? You want these things to integrate with the EMR. Certifications and accreditations. So CLAS is an important certification of vendors and technology to look for. SOC 1, 2, et cetera. These types of certifications and accreditations are important. Again, compliance and IT should be on board to take a look at these things. And then provider engagement rate and adoption rate. These are questions you want to check with your potential vendors. How well are Providers engaging with your HCC suggestions that your AI is creating. Are they accepting them? What are your rejection rates? These are questions to be asking the vendor to share with you. You want to be conducting market research. You want to, again, ask for referrals with peers, right? A lot of people now are implementing these tools. Many of you probably are familiar with, hey, my buddy down the road, he has this tool. Check with your peers, ask for referrals or ask for recommendations of people that you may know that are already using them in their practice. You use RFIs to request information from the vendors directly. You want to prioritize vendors with experience in your org size and specialty. If you have 400,000 risk members, ACO, managed care contracts, huge. You want to make sure that that vendor has some similar clients at that size and that they have executed their tool on that volume. It's important to check that. Equally, if you only have 1,500 members, again, you don't need to maybe buy the Rolls Royce. Start with the Datsun and then move towards the Rolls Royce, right? So there's, air quote, right? So there's different ways to look at this. I think the sweet spot for me for how many vendors should we demo? I like 5. More than 5, for one, takes a lot of time out of your implementation committee's schedule. They all have other regular jobs. And decision fatigue. When you're looking at 10, 15 vendors, it just all starts running together. It's very hard to make a decision. Sort of like wedding dresses, really pick the first one you like and go with it. But again, I say 5. I think 5 vendors is a sweet spot to 5 vendors to demo. There's more than one appointment in these demos too. So you do the demo, you come back together with IT. That's another meeting and another meeting and another meeting. So just keep in mind, the more vendors you demo, the more pulled from all your regular daily work that has to get done happens. You want to clarify the vendor. This isn't truly important miss for me on the last vendor that I implemented. It's a sandbox environment or a non-prod environment. I created to create workflows using live data, and it was not fun, and there was a lot of rework to fix it because we were trying to test. Try to ask for a sandbox or non-production environment access so that you can practice your workflows without potentially impacting live data. And lastly, here on vendor selection is request a pilot first. Pilots are not always easy for these vendors, so I want to make sure I say that. When we say pilot, it's a 5-character word. Pilot means a lot to some of these vendors and all of the work required, and sometimes it doesn't make sense, but you should always ask. All right, implementation and go live planning. We are getting there. I'm moving quick, guys. Okay. Oh gosh, who loves meetings? Who loves meetings to schedule another meeting? Recommended meeting series. This is a labor intense meeting oriented type activity. Lots of communication is required. And I personally like to meet with people this way, face to face. Especially certain things should no longer be an email. They need to be a meeting or a phone call, an actual touch base, not just 25,000 emails. So this is my recommendation and the meeting series that I did as I implement these tools with organizations. Of course, there's no one size fits all. You decide for your organization what works. Weekly vendor meetings. When you pick a vendor, they usually will take the lead on this. You should be meeting with your vendor once a week while you're planning and getting together all of the information that is needed for them to connect to your systems, all the users. There's a lot of things that have to happen during this time. Vendors usually will take the lead on scheduling that series with you. Make sure from the first meeting with your vendor that your implementation committee is present. They need to join those meetings. They need to hear from their respective seat in the organization what is happening and what are the impacts. What are my action items? What do I need to take care of, from the internal quality assurance team or billing and coding? Make sure your implementation committee knows they are required on your vendor calls. First call with a vendor, make sure to request a go live checklist. Most vendors are really good with this, but people are people, or humans are humans, and they might not give it to you. Ask. Bi-weekly provider education. Providers, well, you're excited to hear that, right? More meetings, but more administrative meetings. But in order to, for one, if you have not begun educating your providers on risk adjustment or value-based care, or managed care models and CDI requirements and all of those things, you should start now, right now, today, tomorrow. Figure out a way to start orienting those providers. It could be webinars, on-demand recordings, whatever it is. If you've done no provider education yet on value-based care, but you have value-based care contracts, ACO, and members, that should start today. In terms of implementing a tool, really, bi-weekly provider education series was helpful. This is usually, I create a standing meeting. I make sure to be aware of providers' schedules, and I tailor them differently for providers and administrative staff, right? So again, look at what works best for your providers so you can get optimal attendance, morning, lunch, after hours. And make sure you're tracking who comes and who doesn't. Those providers that don't join your provider education sessions that will talk about the importance and how these tools operate, you may have to reach out to them one-on-one. I've done that. I usually get a list of who did not attend, and then I'm like, it's Nicole again. Call them and get in front of them one-on-one. Weekly internal committee meetings. We're almost done, guys. Your implementation planning committee, you should be meeting with them weekly. All of you should be meeting weekly. Usually I like to meet the day before my vendor meeting so that I can have all my questions or things we've been working on all week trying to figure out ready to go, so that when I meet with the vendor, we all meet with the vendor, we're bam, 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 and we can make the most, get the most outcome out of that meeting and have a meaningful meeting. Administrative and staff weekly touch points. Your provider training on these tools will not be the same as your administrative staff training. These have different workflows. You'll want to also engage your administrative staff, meaning CDI team, billers, coders. This is not your implementation. That's the leadership. This is everybody working in the weeds. They need to understand how to use the tool and have workflow revisions, if necessary, looked at and completed. All right, almost to the end, guys. Key workflow areas. This is the last section before a couple words about compliance, and then we'll get to the QA, and thank you for being patient. Key workflow areas to review and revise. Again, medical practice. What's happening today in your offices? Does the MA do any chart prep for the patient? Are they looking at anything related? Are they just preparing clinical information? Are they doing any chart prep on chronic conditions? You need to understand these workflows. Understand where the tool can streamline the process and also can mitigate possibly inefficiencies. CDI team absolutely needs to be involved. So we talked a little bit before. I'm going to reiterate it again. AI and CDI does not replace CDI staff. It should minimize the number of staff you need. And I'm going to talk real quickly about a few areas where your CDI team, their focus may become a little bit different, but their expertise is just as valuable. For example, doctor, you've implemented the tool, and the provider, I don't want to just say doctor, your provider is rejecting every condition that's presented to them. That should trigger a report be pulled, manual CDI reviewed, and then provider education formulated out of that. Maybe they're rejecting everything because they didn't understand the training of the tool. It can have a huge financial implication to you if your provider's rejecting everything out of the tool. You've now lost service fund opportunity on those conditions, especially if the patient doesn't come back. Again, looking at and then leveraging outcomes of the analytics. Your CDI team should be being fed those reports so they can target manual chart reviews and education for those providers. Process adjustments, so coding and billing team. Do you have concurrent workflows? Do you not? Do you have coders? Do your providers code their own? All of these things need to be looked at so you can determine the best way to use the tool. You might want to increase your lag days for coding at first. You might want to put claims on hold first so you can take a look at them, make sure that they've done the right thing with the tool. So these things have to be looked at. Another area that is really crucial, I wouldn't have put on a slide, a lot of these tools, the analytics will not be accurate if the provider has not locked their note. I can't tell you, and I know in this room how many people probably are chasing thousands of progress notes that are not locked. It's common in the real world. You won't have accurate information out of these tools more than likely if the provider doesn't lock their notes. This is an important tracking area to make sure the tool is performing for you. Here's a couple of things here, other reasons why your internal QA audit team should be involved as well, which we've talked about. You might implement a tool and then all of a sudden every patient for Dr. Jones, every single one of them has asthma. That should be a red flag to you. Your internal QA audit team can be given those analytics so they can do a targeted chart review. Maybe they're skipping the review and just accepting everything. Maybe they're rejecting every condition that's presented to them. These are things that happen. And again, using the analytics out of these tools is very valuable to a lot of your teams in your ecosystem. All right. New employees. So EMR team would be the last one. We want to make sure that maybe your EMR team, when people are hired, they train them on the EMR and maybe they can give them an overview of the new AI tool that you have implemented. This would be a good potential area to start the initial awareness of the tool. Again, access management, sometimes the EMR teams, a lot of times it's IT, sometimes it's HR is responsible for turning on and off access when a patient is hired or leaves or quits or calls in rich, whatever it is. You want to make sure that the access is disabled. A lot of these tools not only go directly through the EMR, but there is a internet or a dashboard in the cloud that you log into outside of the EMR that would also need to be shut down. Important things to think about for HIPAA and supporting these tools. From compliance considerations, again, anytime you are sharing screens, doing demos, working with potential vendors, make sure that you're using anonymous data. You know, a test account. You want to make sure you're not sharing PHI, live PHI in a screen. These seem like no-brainers, but you'd be surprised. You want to make sure when you're communicating back and forth with potential vendors that you've either had a BAA signed and an NDA, especially if you're going to share real patient information. NDAs should be signed before you start interacting with a vendor, even for the demos. Compliance with general data protection regulations and HIPAA and other, California has some unique things specific to California. These are important things that need to be looked at. Again, your implementation committee should have compliance and IT on it, and they should be helping to look for these things, make sure everything, checks the box. NDAs we talked about. You want to make sure that the AI, and as you go through demos and you work with your implementation committee, that they will be looking at these things, that the recommendations or the query that comes out of the tool looks accurate in terms of the clinical support and the condition it's recommending that the patient needs assessed. These are things that you should be practicing and working with the vendors to look at how it operates. We want to make sure that that these tools are updated with all industry guidelines and also the HCC models. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I can't wait to see all of you or any of you at RISE. So thanks. Have a wonderful day. Appreciate you.